Ladies and gentlemen, the Yiheng Wang controversy officially has no end. In June, he almost had his 2x2 world record average removed for illegal timer starts, that scandal hitting its absolute peak around a month ago, when it was confirmed that the record would stand in an official statement by the WCA board, which of course caused massive uproar in the community, with some people even wanting to overthrow the board entirely, all because of this 10-year-old child's Rubik's Cube solves. But now he's gotten himself into yet another controversy that I never really thought I'd ever see in the first place, and it once again has people talking. And this case in particular really has me asking the question, is it even his fault? Because this past weekend in the second round of Goyan Open 2024 in China, Yiheng, whose PR single was a 3.38 going into this moment, on solve 3 of his average, got a 3.27. This of course broke his own previous Asian record and was the second fastest Rubik's Cube solve of all time. I say was because understandably people were going crazy. Yiheng finally got lucky, cubing is over, you name it, and this solve did in fact show up in the Cubing China website as an official result. But of course, it's Yiheng Wang. And you know what that means. There was a problem with this solve. A problem that has gotten it officially disqualified and removed. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the solve itself. This solve from Yiheng was an absolutely flawless solution that's also another example of what can happen when he gets lucky. And just looking at the scramble initially, Yiheng is dual color neutral, so of course looking at yellow, it is pretty nasty here on the scramble. But white's actually really nice because there's a pretty easy 4-move cross that you can execute by simply inserting the orange cross edge with an L prime and a B, and then you can just insert these two like so, putting down the blue, and that solves the cross. But what Yiheng actually ends up doing here is he does basically the exact same 4 moves, but he does it in a way that is optimal for finger tricks. So he did this by starting the solve with red on front whenever he actually went to go and pick up the cube, and then he'll simply begin with a wide R prime move. And what that does is it now sets you up perfectly to be able to do a D and a U at the same time, and then you can simply finish off the cross by undoing that wide R. But what makes his F12 so fast on the solve is that we can notice 3 of our edges are already oriented, which means that if he executes this solution correctly, he's not actually going to have to rotate the cube at all until the red-blue pair, which he can just solve into the front left. So you'll see that happen here in a minute, of course just going into the orange-blue for his first pair, which is also great because he's solving into the back left first, which is really nice for look ahead, as he can simply just cancel into this orange-green here, and then solving both of his first 2 pairs into the back. And as I mentioned earlier, he's not going to have to rotate at all for the first 3 pairs, so just deciding between these two, obviously you're going to want to go for the green-red, because if you go for the other pair, you're going to have to rotate, and then insert, and then rotate back to do the red-green. So we're just going to go for this pair first, of course just pairing it up like so, and then inserting it. And as he inserts it, it actually also ends up pairing up the red-blue, which is very, very nice for last slot. And what's interesting about Yiheng solves is he never really inserts pairs with F moves, so kind of like that. He always rotates and then just solves it with RU or LU moves. And that's exactly what he chooses to do on this solve. And then we actually see something that I've seen a lot of Yiheng Wang solves in my life, ladies and gentlemen, and this never really tends to happen to him that often. So he uses quite an interesting alg for this case, which is simply taking out this pair, and then doing these 3 moves, and then you actually pair it up like this with F moves, and then you can just insert the pair back, and that's the OLL alg, and he gets a PLL skip, and of course just finishing off this solve with a U prime AUF. And his F12 here was done in nearly sub 2 seconds, which is wild when you realize that he actually needed 13 TPS to be able to pull that off. So even without the spamming on PLL, Yiheng was still able to pull off 13 TPS in an official solve. But of course, there was a massive problem with this solve. If you watch this footage closely, after he solves the cube, he celebrates and then he actually picks up the cube he just solved instead of his warm-up cube. Now, this shouldn't be a problem, right? He's already solved the cube. But regulation A6E1 exists, which states that a penalty for applying a move to the puzzle after stopping the timer is a DNF, which means the Yiheng's 3.27 has been completely disqualified and will not count as an official solve. I remember we saw something similar happen to Max Park in one of his 6x6 world records where he actually touched his camera during inspection, DNFing the solve, even though technically there was nothing wrong with the solve itself, but nothing like this has ever happened on a 3x3 solve of this magnitude. I mean, Yiheng finished the solve, the cube is clearly solved, I showed you how he solved it, but it doesn't count because of the rule that you can't touch the cube until the attempt is signed off on. And Yiheng probably just got a bit excited here picking up the wrong cube. Now, does this ruling even make sense? Well, of course, because if the rule didn't exist, you could just finish half of the cube and then do all these turns to solve it after you stop the timer. But honestly, I feel terrible for Yiheng not only because of his 3.27 being disqualified, but just because of the sheer amount of controversy over the last couple of months. I mean, when you're only 10 years old, how much of this is even your fault? I highly doubt he was sliding while knowing it was cheating, and this was just another example of the fact that the stack mat timer is flawed. We've seen this since all the way back in Worlds 2017, when timer resets had a huge impact on the final outcome. And this was an example of how, when you have a timer separate from the cube itself, there will inevitably be problems. So smart cubes are going to have to be the future of competitive cubing at some point. It's the only way to stop things like this from even happening in the first place. But, you know, 6-year-olds don't even need warm-up cubes to be faster than you. But yeah, his 327 is now just as official as a solve he did at home, and Yiheng's PR single is still a 3.38. Here's the video where I talked about that. And besides that, that's about it. See ya.